Hello, everyone, and welcome to Writers Drinking Coffee. This is a podcast where writers sit around, drink tasty beverages, and talk about writing, publishing, and the whole creative process. There may be rants and raves and opinions that do not agree but are lovingly delivered. We do not censor ourselves, so consider us PG-13. Today's gallery includes Chaz Frenchley with Madeline Robbins and me, Jeannie Warner. This is episode 167, an interview with Colm. Welcome, Colm.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It is an absolute delight. Now, my understanding is you're a clinical associate professor with the expository writing program at New York University. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's quite a mouthful. We basically teach essay writing, so trying to make sense on the page. And it's a pleasure to work with, budding young artists who are trying to figure out how to make sense in an increasingly confusing world. So it's a strange job.
Yeah, I'd never heard of clinical associate before.
That was my question.
Yeah, we have to put on rubber gloves before we handle the essays and everything. I think that the clinical just refers to the concept of teaching a skill rather than a subject. So instead of us working through a syllabus like you might in history or anthropology, we're teaching a technical skill. So that word tends to get applied to labs. So this word clinical got imported in from that lab line of teaching.
I'm still going to imagine the white lab coat and rubber gloves now. Thank you.
I've seen some college essays that needed to be handled with rubber gloves, no question.
Well, I mean, all the buzz at the moment is chatbots that have learned to emulate human-sounding essays. So this is something we're all trying to get our heads around, and it's a fascinating challenge. I mean, to me, it just seems like it's an opportunity to realize why we are writing in the first place. I think so many people are forced into expressing their thinking and writing from a young age. They're forced to write essays. They're forced to express their ideas on the page, and they have such a negative experience of writing. I didn't realize, because I loved writing from a very young age, that when I started teaching writing, lots of people were actually scared of it in the same way that a lot of people are afraid of, let's say, mathematics or something. There's this real anxiety that this is going to be a painful or humiliating experience. So, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, now that there's a machine to kind of do all the writing for us, we don't have to worry about it. Now we can just start to relax and do writing because we want to do writing.
Yeah, I was reading something just the other day about how the college essay is fundamentally dead now. But I was just reading through the blog post you wrote for Alma Alexander about why writers write. It's fascinating stuff.
Thank you. I kind of wrote that in a fever dream state of mind. I was trying to figure out why I am writing, because when I was a kid, I never thought about it. It was just, I write because that's the most pleasure I can have, basically, is to just conjure worlds out of the void. But then you get older and, I have 4 young children now, and I have all these demands on my time. And when I sit down to write, I think a part of me is pragmatic and going, there needs to be a delivery here. I need to get something out of it. I need to have something I can put on my CV or something I can use to, at the very least, impress people at parties or something like that. And it seems like a fundamental, spiritual corruption that's been growing on me over the years. So I think I wrote that essay to try and scrape away the plaque and remember that writing is basically a mystery. You don't know why you do it. And hopefully you don't know what you're going to find when you do it. And you should feel a little bit scared when you do it, I think.
I love that I was just mentioning this earlier, but I love that there are more neurodivergent POVs and writing styles out there, because I think it actually represents an increasing representation in literature. I mean, my husband put a whole bunch of his old college-age books out, and let's face it, the man had a ton of Clark and Heinlein and Asimov out there, but none of them really had that different self-doubting, neurological challenges point of view. And I liked the increasing representation. And part of that led me to one of the things that I really had a hard time getting into and then fell in love with in your book, which is the new one I wanted to talk to you about, is Claiming to Wake. Did I even say that right, or do I need an accent for it?
Oh, it sounds fine to me. Claiming to Wake, it's a slang term. Claiming, where I grew up, claiming means to challenge someone to a fight. And the wake is the slang word for reality. So it's picking a fight with reality.
Oh, it was. And Alma, again, to throw her name about wildly, Alma Alexander said, She was reading this book. It was clearly award winning. People just didn't know it yet. I could read it too. And I got so excited. I wanted to chat with everybody here about it. So do you mind if we just dive right in? Because there's some really cool things. And I think this could appeal to a very wide audience and more than they might suspect at first.
I'd be honored.
Well, it starts off that it's in first person, and I'm going to call it heavily cant. I mean, that it's, much in the way it's an argot, it's an accent, and you have to read it. And it is, or it can be on the first couple of pages, a little bit of a barrier at first to say, where am I? How am I settling into this? It's not quite as easy as a traditional Campbell settle in, everything's easy, straightforward. But it is a barrier that makes it worth fighting your way through, because once you're in it and you start listening to it, especially once I realized that it was post-apocalyptic Ireland, I started reading every single word with an Irish accent in my head, and then it flowed like music.
That's wonderful. Yeah, we were talking about music in the preamble, and I've become more and more kind of entranced with this idea that I think that my favorite writing has this kind of quasi-musical quality to it, which when I say musical, I don't necessarily mean pleasant. I mean that the quality of rhythm, there's staccato qualities or legato or whatever it may be, but the sense that you're drawn into a textural sonic landscape and you can't ignore it. That doesn't become transparent. It's like part of the pleasure or the challenge or whatever of the book. That to me is very engaging. I'm reminded of like a book that made a big impression on me was Train Spotting by Welch. And that kind of it's full of filthy invective as well, but the language is very, very much kicking and screaming, fully alive, and you can't ignore it.
It is, and it was the first book I think I ran into of the humans speak in sentence fragments all the time. But it actually used them to break up shorter ideas and sentences. And I wasn't sure how I felt. Again, it's the cautious new approach. I wasn't sure how I felt about it, but it can grow on you.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, acquired tastes are sort of the best ones, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, this is written in first person, and I'm going to call him somewhat of an unreliable narrator, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
That's fair, because, the very cover shows you that it's somewhere post-apocalyptic with plagues, because it's a wonderful picture. It looked like a medieval woodcut of a plague mask, for instance.
Yeah, that's my friend. He's an Irish illustrator called James Seymour, and he does these incredibly stark black pen and ink drawings. And I saw his work online, and the minute I saw it, I went, I have to have him for the cover. There's no one else I want to have illustrate the cover for this book except him. And I was just so lucky he obliged.
Well, it's perfect. And it is a world that most of the services are shut down and people are mostly eating via IV bag, which I like that, I'm halfway in and there's no coffee anywhere and I don't know how they're alive. So
that's right. I mean, that's one of the more unrealistic elements of the book, I suppose.
It is.
Severely addicted to coffee.
But I love that you had lighting up went from being, if you say that somebody lit up today, I would think of smoking. And in this future, I think of haloing, which took me into, it's a very Ready Player One vibe. Instead of America with stacked trailer parks, it's post-apocalyptic Ireland with bodies tucked away everywhere. Also less sexist. And thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. I wrote this book 10 years ago, before the respiratory pandemic that we're all familiar with hit. And I was just struck by the idea that it would be interesting to think about what would it be like kind of at the tail end of a pandemic when some people have come to the reasonable assumption that it's over and we should get back to business as usual. And other people are still of the persuasion that they should remain in the habits that they've acquired through the pandemic, and that there'll be social tensions between those groups and that they might become almost cult-like. So then when I kind of saw, well, a somewhat diluted, but still pretty acrimonious split happening in the American culture in the full thrall of the pandemic around 2020, I felt like, oh, maybe it's time to dust off this novel and try harder to get it out there into the public eye, because I'm not very good at pushing my work. I'm very I love writing, but I'm very shy about even talking about it with you today, although I'm really enjoying talking to you about it. I feel almost, I'm so Irish and so middle class. I feel like no one should be talking to me about anything.
I have never thought of the Irish as a particularly shy race.
Well, I guess it depends who you ask, but I think that I'm from rural Ireland, and I think that we're grand together, but we're a little bit standoffish when it comes to salesmanship, promoting our wares. I
Oh,
think
sure.
that
Yeah,
feels
yeah,
a
yeah.
little awkward, and
And
I'm
not
sure that's
really
true of the
English.
British too.
Yeah,
I'm
I mean,
neither Irish nor English, and yet I'm no good at it either.
it may be a writerly thing across
Maybe.
boundaries.
I'm a
Yeah.
freak who likes standing in front of a room and talking to people. So,
No,
you
but
know.
that's performance. I like standing in front of a room and talking to people, but telling them why my writing is worth their reading is completely off the table. So those are two different things.
Yeah. Talking about ideas is heaven, and then talking about your material product is difficult. But it's an interesting challenge too, because it's one that I got to get my head around. Because if I'm really serious about becoming a novelist, I'm going to have to learn to just get over this, get over myself.
It has become a part of the job far more than it used to be. I mean, I started publishing in the 1980s, and it was. I think of myself as the last of the ivory tower generation. I could sit and type on a typewriter my novel and send it off to London, and my agent would read it, and she would send it to the publisher, and the publisher would buy it and publish it, and I didn't really have to be involved in any of that, and I loved it.
I published my first book in 1979, and I was a baby. I was writing it while wearing nappies, but I still fight mightily against the sense that my job is to sit there and write the best thing that I can and then hand it to someone else who does all the other stuff. And I've worked in publishing. I realize that my interior landscape is at war with the rest of the world, but I bitterly resent it.
I can't relate to either of you two. I'm from the land of the you have to do things on your own to get what you want. So I admire that you're doing that, Colm.
Thanks. Baby steps, but it's a pleasure.
Steps.
It's a lot easier talking to people that are genuinely interested in literature and the ideas that grow out of literature than, I would feel a great chill in my bones if I was talking to people about, I don't know, the market, that's terrifying.
Colm, can you? This is jutting off at a bit of a tangent, but I'm fascinated. Can you talk in tolerably non-academic language about the connections you find between James Joyce and mandalas?
I have a strange relationship with Joyce, in that I don't really love reading him. I've met people that are like enamored with Joyce, and they're like acolytes of Joyce, and I'm not. I come at him as a sort of suspicious reader, and I remember reading him kind of reluctantly as an undergraduate, and slowly coming around to finding that there were all these things sort of hidden under the surface of his prose, and it was like an Easter egg hunt. And I got more and more interested in these geometric motifs, and then I was in Holland with a friend one time, and I had a psychedelic experience, and as many, I suppose, tourists do. And I had my first introduction to a deeper level of reality that was fundamentally geometric in nature. And then after that, my reading of Finnegan's Wake completely changed. My understanding of what Joyce was doing became, it was almost like I was studying a parallel reality that he had access to through ways I don't know. And I just wanted to track that idea of what is it like to construct a textural reality that's more interested in like a conceptual jigsaw puzzle that's being put together like a tessellation. All of the basic characters are really like phonemic constructions, like in the poem The Jabberwocky. There's no real words in Lewis Carroll's Jabberwocky. There's just phonemes that are stuck together. They sound a little bit like words, but they somehow conjure a landscape. You get a sense that there are things that are happening. There's a hero, there's a monster, there's a quest narrative. It's mythopoetic, but it's not really written in English. And to write an entire book like that's fascinating.
You do know that there are values assigned, there are meanings to all the words that he uses.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Brillig is that time between tea and dusk, I believe, if I remember rightly, and so on. But anyway, yeah, no, go on.
Yeah, no, I remember reading a little gloss that he gave on the words. He actually, Chortle, he invented that word.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
And it's a lovely word.
It's a lovely word, yeah.
It's a lovely word, and we'd be poorer without it. And I think that there's something about that. It's almost like it's bordering on synesthesia, that idea of you're seeing something, you're hearing something else, and then you're feeling something as well. And none of it is easily reducible to a simple signified relationship. It's some weird uneasy I keep coming back to the word geometry, but there's a strange new geometry of meaning that's unfolding, and you realize that there can be curved geometries and twisted geometries, and reading Finnegan's Wake is like leaving plane geometry and moving into curved geometry, and it's a great workout for the mind. I don't know if it maps neatly onto my fiction, but I do think that there's something about that awareness. Sorry.
I'm going to submit that it does. I mean, to a certain extent, I can see where you were thinking with that and how it might have influenced you when you were talking, or when our main character is talking about when he was a kid in school, and you took it from how we used to all rent space on the game servers to let them fold molecules, for the big molecule project. And then how he was directly involved with that, and then know that when he has this vision that his brother may have left of the pure non-Euclidean space-time, I got a very kaleidoscopic angles view of a lot of that. So I think it may have crept in whether you realized it or not. So
well, I think that it points to a kind of a deep hope and a deep fear I have, because I was raised in a kind of a world where the only thing at my disposal was, when I was very, very young, when I was 6 or 7 and I started writing, there weren't really video games going around. I don't think our household even got a computer for a few more years. And when we did, they were very crude, like a Commodore 64. It was fairly boring games. But now I get the impression that there's a new era where people, predominantly young people, skilled, intelligent, ambitious people, are spending more time in a simulated three-dimensional reality where they're manipulating objects in space, and they're thinking about spatial relationships a lot more. And increasingly, they're thinking less and less in words. Concepts don't get expressed as much verbally, and more in terms of spatial relationships. And I think that's interesting.
Back to geometry again.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a kind of spatial genius that's emerging, and these artificial environments.
Your hero, for instance, starts it and said, "I scape," which was a job specialty that he thought would be there for him. But then he gets into the job market and discovers, right, that one thing he was good at has disappeared, due to AI, as we'd said before, which there's echoes of being replaced by tech and automation every single year. So if there's a question that you have is he seems to want to do what his brother is doing, giving up reality forever. Is there a way to mentally give up, to keep that which is the brain alive without having a body forever? Because at least I'm still partway through, and I'm like, is this an interesting form of suicide, or is it an upload of your consciousness? And there seems to be a little bit of I'm just calling it, you're on a cutting wave of interesting new topics we're seeing in sci-fi of what is it to be alive? Can I be within a computer? Do I have to have this incredibly messy body that needs coffee?
Yeah, right. In a way, I think I didn't really think about this at the time I was writing it, but upon rereading, I think there's a very basic question about where human dignity lies, because for a lot of people, hiding from the body is shameful or disgusting or whatever, and there's a lot of people that try to escape their body, and they might try to escape it through manifold ways, like disappearing into art or whatever. That for a brief period of time they like that quality of their body disappearing, and they just immerse themselves in a good book or whatever it may be. But now, with the possibility that maybe all of intellectual labor, at least in theory, could be done by a more powerful artificial intelligence, where does human dignity lie? And I think that some people will find that that's a sort of spiritual question, really. I mean, will we continue to make and do things? And if so, what things will we do? What will we do with our time on Earth, basically? That's the question.
Yeah,
and, yeah.
Sorry, Han. It's one of the things that Ian Banks, the late, alas, science fiction writer and novelist, explored a lot in his Culture series. It's what's that word? Post scarcity. It's a post scarcity civilization with very powerful AIs who are clearly, I mean, they're so smart they might very well be keeping the humans around as pets. But yeah, what do humans do when they no longer need to do anything? Is one of the great questions that runs through the whole series.
Yeah, it's increasingly like a less hypothetical question. I mean, if something could drill down, read all your novels, really, really, really train so that it is a note perfect impersonator of you, and then it generates your future novels for you, are you going to keep writing? And the question, I actually don't know the answer to this anymore, but I want to believe that I would, but the way I would write would change, but I'm not sure how I can explain how it would change, but I want to know how it would change because I want to write the way I would write if I didn't feel the need to write anymore. Do you know what I mean?
No, absolutely.
You start out with a character and he's caring for old people in a geriatric facility, wiping them down, getting them clean, doing all of, replacing the IVs, etc. And in a weird sort of way, I mean, I had an odd dream about such things years and years ago, but this almost had the little bit of death with dignity to it. Instead of living out the last of your lives gasping and moaning and crying, etc., that you could spend it in this really beautiful nirvana of inside your brain, of what your brain can create. And although he didn't exactly do it with a great reverence or etc., which, speaks of his own challenges, but our character kind of presented a little bit of, maybe this is a really beautiful way to end things. And I haven't got to the end of the book yet, so I can't, give away what happens at the end. But wow, what a beautiful opportunity to say you've lived, you've gone through, maybe you had the plague, maybe it is, but there you are, still clinging to life in your 90s or 100s. What does it mean to be alive? And can you still enjoy the end of it through this way? So in a weird sort of way, it was like he was doing something really neat for people that had nothing at the end. And I thought that was kind of beautiful.
Thanks. I think in a deeply non-idealistic way, I think he sees himself as maintaining the servers that are required for the program to keep running.
I also wanted to thank you for the Easter egg of the quiet, hilarious dig of a U.S. president from the biddy at the back of the bus, because don't think we didn't catch that and think that was awesome.
That's one of the few things I did add in the rewrite, the 10-year gap between the composition and the rewrite. There was a few things I wanted to tuck in there.
Okay. Why was there a 10-year gap?
I wrote the book, and then I realized when I had written it that I had basically written it as a way of teleporting from New York back to Cork, where I'm from.
Yeah.
So it was a sort of teleportation device. But I'd written, I loved it, and I think it works really well as a teleportation device for me. But then I realized that it's possible that nobody else would enjoy this weird linguistic reality that this character inhabits. So I sent it out to a few agents, and they didn't even know how to respond. They sort of went, "Oh, this is interesting. I have no idea how to sell it. Never contact me again," kind of thing. And so I went, "Okay, maybe novel writing is not for me." So I just put it away and got on at my day job, and focused on poetry and writing essays and other things. But then I just felt very strongly when the pandemic came out that the book had kind of just prefigured a few fissures that had emerged in society that I thought it's kind of timely. I'll try it again. I'll try a little harder. I'll try to be a little less shy. And I just pushed, but it took me 10 years to kind of just get over that hump.
No, I think we can all appreciate that. It's, when you have a book, if it doesn't catch on right away, it's oh, maybe it wasn't as good as I thought. Maybe I shall just sit here and eat worms in the dark or something. But I really love that you pushed it again and you went back and maybe you added a few things. And I figure they want to see the first 50 pages. So maybe they never actually realized that. But you do have little Easter eggs. And again, to draw a parallel for Ready Player One, they're different. They're not just somebody being nostalgic about the past. This is very much not nostalgic about the past so much as, hey, we have a new society and a new future and there's fewer people and why don't we do it right? And it's a beautiful rant that your character has in his head saying, why do I care about, hey, we have trains and malls again, hooray, instead of saying we have an opportunity to build our society better. So it's the oddliest utopic point of view in a dystopia that I've ever read.
Thanks. Actually, that took on a new meaning when I reread it again, because it struck me that we really did. There was a brief period when I don't want to call it the zenith, I guess it would be the nadir of the pandemic, and no one was traveling. And they said there was these news reports that dolphins are swimming up through the canals in Venice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That the planet seemed to be retaken. My wife had to go on a short journey and she was driving on an empty road and she saw all these deer and foxes on the highway. And there was just this little nod to how quickly the natural reality could reassert itself if we just stopped making noise.
There's a bird called the Cornish chough, which had not been seen in Cornwall for decades.
Not outside the pubs, anyway.
It was extinct within the county, and then mad cow disease hit, and all the footpaths were closed. Nobody was tramping around the Cornish coastline anymore, and suddenly the choughs came back. Whether they came down from Devon or whether they'd been there all the time and were just hiding, I don't know. But yeah, we had choughs again. It's not far from desolation to exuberance.
Yeah, it's amazing how much silence and stillness can recuperate profoundly. And I that's why I felt like there was this weird kind of missed opportunity, like that we had this little insight about how much damage we were doing and how profoundly we can make a difference so quickly just by calming down and being still. Mm-hmm. And then it was like, well, it's over now, so let's get back to exactly the way we've always been.
Everybody wants to go back to frantic because
frantic
is so much fun. Gosh, yes.
So when you were writing this, when you originally wrote it, was this just something that you did on your own computer, ignoring Chaz and his typewriter, but did you use any particular tools in it? Tell us a little bit about your methods, and do you still use the same ones?
Just as a side note, physically speaking, working with a typewriter strikes me as being like the literary equivalent to being a lumberjack, pounding down into the keys. Because I know there was a really old one in my neighbor's house when I was a kid, and I played with it, and my God, it was like a workout. You had to hit those things.
Yeah, I am not physically a particularly strong person, but I have super strong fingers. Just from having used manual typewriters long ago.
An electric typewriter, which made it a lot easier. But my mother, who desperately wanted to be a writer and an editor, kept getting promoted at the publishing house where she worked because she could type 105 words per minute on a manual typewriter. That woman could have been throttling chickens.
Now our question is, do you use QWERTY or Dvorak? I mean, these are...
It's like the John Henry of typing. She finishes the novel and then it keels over and dies.
I fancied I was quick at over 100, and then I saw my husband using a Dvorak. I'm like, that's not possible. People don't type that fast. But
I didn't know Joe used Dvorak.
Joe uses Dvorak.
That's fabulous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are you working on now, Colm? Is there a sequel? Is there a new direction?
I'm working on, this is going to sound unstable, but I think I'm working on 3 novels all at once. I'm moving back and forth between them, and I think they're all growing out of the same basic sort of soil. They're all growing out of the same world soil, but they're all distinct stories, and they're all standalone stories, which is like the stupidest thing to do, because
No,
I think,
it's not as lovely.
yeah, I don't know. I think that a smart thing to do would be to write a series or something like that, where people liked the world and they can keep going back to the world. To kind of create distinct worlds seems to kind of break any momentum you might have, but that's just the way my imagination's going, so that's the way it's going to happen, I guess.
I don't know. I would want to. I mean, you've given us post-apocalyptic Ireland. There's part of me that wonders, what was this same plague like in, for instance, how is it different in sub-Saharan Africa? How is it different in Los Angeles? How is it different down in Buenos Aires, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a fascinating direction to take. I don't know enough about geography. I'm not well traveled enough to do this. My wife is very well traveled. She's actually a travel writer, and she knows, she's been to Mongolia and all these other countries, and she's got the exterior imagination. She thinks about the world. I really just think about ideas. I'll run the least developed idea by you, because maybe I can brainstorm at you guys.
Do it.
Well, here's the pitch. So it's a world where AI is now largely doing the work of thinking. So universities have actually become more like their monastic origins, where people are going more for meditative purposes and to develop a sense of why they exist. And as a result, the monastic universities have acquired a kind of feudal quality, where they're all sort of quasi at war with each other, and they're indoctrinating their students to their own unique spiritual systems. So it's about the tensions between the university students between those systems.
And the Army Corps of Philosophers, I can tell.
I would read the hell out of that book.
Yeah.
And have you read Neil Stephenson's Anathem?
What's that?
Neil Stephenson's Anathem.
No, not yet. No, I'm so far behind.
Go forth and read it. It is not the same idea, but it is an idea.
Better not be
parallel.
Oh yeah, that's my next port of call, I think.
Yes.
Well,
it's long and complex, and I adore it.
It also brings in, we had so many post-apocalyptic nuclear war stories. You know, we had The Postman, we had, Boy and His Dog, we have Mad Max and the others. This one makes it a little bit, because a lot of us are still living through this. I think it's a time and a period that's got legs without rubbing people's noses in it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. Because I think it's different than the shadow of a nuclear war. And not that we're out of that shadow, because obviously we still live in an era of Putin, and God knows what's coming around the corner. But it's not the nuclear war. It doesn't matter that, biological warfare might be a thing. But I feel like the great challenge for the 21st century is going to be a fundamentally spiritual one, which is, where do we derive our dignity? What role does human creativity play, where we can outsource more and more of our creative work to machines, and ultimately, not to get too kind of full pretentious about it, very basic questions like, why are we here? I think that there's no hiding from those questions. When you're working, you can kind of hide from them, but when work is like a role play, then you can't hide from them anymore.
but I mean, that raises the even more fundamental question. Were we here for a purpose before we made the machines that could take that purpose away from us?
Yeah, I think our purpose is always to figure out what our purpose is, to be honest with you. It's the weirdest game. This life is a weird game.
Yeah.
How disenfranchising for God if our purpose is to center ourselves around God, and we farm that out to the AIs. If I were God, I'd be somewhat pissed off.
Oh, that's the 9 billion names of God.
Well, yes.
Well, there was a piece in one of the write-ups that I read of your book that I found it it really does deal fundamentally with an issue of addiction and what are
Yeah.
you addicted to? And, thinking about what am I addicted to right now, I'd have a hard time in a life without coffee and sugar. And your Tato, I love Tato. Tato has a challenge with, he's addicted to not being in his body, to just being able to run freely through his mind and experience the reality that he creates. And what will we be addicted to in the future is such an interesting question.
Yeah, and I'm surprised by the addictions I have now. I mean, like when I was a kid, I had a strong sense that addictions always involved, they were sort of dramatic and almost Byron-esque or something, like you might be addicted to sword fighting or heavy drinking or
Hockey.
war. Or yeah, and you know what? Any kind of combative thing or
Yeah.
difficult thing. I can see the romantics, in my mind's eye as being the standard bearers for like cool and sexy addictions. But if you told me when I was like 10 that, oh, your main addiction, the thing you'll really struggle with is like staring into this little phone and scrolling, I wouldn't have believed them, like, because it doesn't sound addictive at all.
Yeah.
Oh, I would believe it I was addicted to books as a kid. I had books hidden within every single textbook in school that there was. So, and if they're like, she's not engaging. No, she really just wants to be left alone in a corner with a book, which is why I'm less worried about kids playing a game, because is it that much different when it's storytelling in an adventure format?
It's a wonder I had.
Like the picture you have of the turn of the century, 1902, the train running through Reading, and everybody had the newspaper out and were ignoring each other. And that's what I hold up when people are like, people are so buried in their phones. I'm like, I don't want to talk to strangers. So
my history teacher used to tell a story about his father, who was an Edwardian gentleman, and was traveling in a compartment train, which, there are 6 or 8 people in a compartment, and there's no aisle, there's no corridor. You can't leave the compartment till the train stops. And this guy had some kind of fit or seizure and tried to throw himself out of the train. And my history teacher's father and a gentleman who's sitting opposite him grabbed the guy and just held on to him until they reached a station and could hand him over to somebody who could take better care of him. And then they got back in the train and they resumed their journey. And my history teacher, as a boy, asked his father, "What did you two talk about afterwards?" And his father said, "Talk? Good grief, son, we hadn't been introduced."
yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. The future, the hard part about imagining it, usually people think about the extra things that will be there that aren't there now. But it's the subtractive quality that's harder to imagine. Oliver Sacks was talking to his, your story there reminded me of etiquette and it diminishing over time. Oliver Sacks, the psychiatrist, was talking to his grandmother who'd grown up in a very, very different England. And he said, it's amazing. Over the course of your lifetime, you've witnessed the invention of the radio, the telephone, recorded music, motor-powered cars, space flight, television, all these things. Which thing strikes you as being the most amazing, and has it been difficult to adjust? And she said, no. When everything arrived, it all seemed to kind of make sense. But I couldn't get my head around looking around London one day and going, where have all the horses gone? There's a sense of like, there used to be hundreds of horses and now there aren't any at all. This idea of what will disappear that you hadn't even anticipated disappearing, that's a real challenge, I think.
No, absolutely. My grandfather, the same. He grew up as a kid in rural Kent and never saw a motor car. And he saw people walking on the moon 20 years before he died. I thought
that was time travelers.
Yeah, I thought that was a gulf that was broader than anybody's ever could be. Except that I think now the technology shift. I think maybe the difference from my childhood typewriters to when I die is going to be even greater.
Sonic changes. My husband is a recording engineer and hears things that only dogs and other recording engineers hear. So we'll be watching a movie and he'll say, they're using the wrong tones for the sound of that coin in that particular phone. When you say, did you get a dial tone? My kids have no idea what the hell I'm talking about, except that their father has explained it to them. But there are all sorts of things that were omnipresent when I was a kid back in the Pleistocene that are no longer there, and they're sound cues.
Yes.
That I mean, there are certain engine cues that I know from growing up riding in old cars that are
shifts of gear,
the sort of rattly tappet sound of a car whose timing has gone to hell. And my children don't know these things.
Yeah, absolutely. There was I had a lovely moment in a small museum in Orkney. It had a display case basically saying this is what life was like in the 1940s, and there was a dial phone. And there was a father trying to explain to his 8-9-year-old daughter how you used a dial phone, because it is not intuitive if you just look at it.
My older daughter was born in 1990. My younger daughter was born in 1996. The plastic play school toys that she had. Julie, the older one, had a dial phone. And Becca had a punch button phone. So that in that 6-year period, it had gone down to the point where it had filtered into Fisher Price.
Listen, you dinosaurs, I'm going to do great in Colm's New Future Reality, because the minute we can record dreams and share them with others, I'm going to be a millionaire and you can all come live on my island.
Thank you.
Colm, thank you so much for visiting with us today. This has been fantastic, and I love
Thank you for having me.
Can we get you again? Can we get you back?
I think we're going to have to.
I'd love to. Absolutely.
Well, we will put links to the fascinating things we've discussed during this episode on our website, which is www.writersdrinkingcoffee.com. Best of luck with Claiming to Wake. I tend to tell everybody that they have to read it, and probably it came out this year, right?
Yeah, just a few weeks ago. In September, I think it came out. But yeah,
we should all go recommend it for something in the awards that we have power over. So go out there.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure talking to you, and I'd love to come back.
Oh, it's a delight. You've been listening to Writers Drinking Coffee, a labor of love and enthusiasm put together by the hosts. Our main web support magic is brought to you by Deirdre Schween, and our sound engineer and backup web spider is David Welsh. Our intro music is Pretty Maid Milking a Cow, and our exit music is Breakfast with a Morning Person, both by Michael Engberg. Our podcast sponsors are Jackal Designs in Australia, The Bean Scene in Sunnyvale, California, and Arm Street out of Kharkiv, Ukraine. An honorable mention out there to all of the restaurants that serve coffee. We love you. Thanks for listening.